Good afternoon, everybody. This is Trevor McTaggart from Strongpoint. I want to thank everybody for coming to our webinar today. We're going to be reviewing multi-platform risk and change management and how to do that with NetSuite and Salesforce. Again, I'm from Strongpoint, and we're happy to have our team from Celigo with us today. And I'd like to introduce Mark Walker, who's the president and CEO of Strongpoint, to start our webinar. And please don't hesitate to ask us questions in the chat box, and we will be addressing those as we get to the end of the session. So thanks very much for attending, and Mark, it's to you.
Thank you, Trevor. So thank you, everybody, for attending today. We're very excited to introduce you to some of the ideas that we've been working on with the team at Celigo to help solve the multi-platform risk and change management problems that our customers, our joint customers, face. And with me is Rico Andrade. We're going to be talking today, before I introduce ourselves in more detail, we're going to be talking today about the problem generally, about what the best practices are in dealing with these sorts of problems, a little bit about Strongpoint, a little about Celigo, and then we'll be talking about how we're working together to make this much, much, much easier. So Rico, would you like to introduce yourself and say a few words about Celigo?
Hi, everyone. Yes, this is Rico Andrade here. Very happy to be part of this. Celigo is we're an iPaaS integration company. We help you connect your systems through such as Salesforce and NetSuite and HubSpot and many other systems together through both our integration platform, integrator.io, or through our unique smart connectors, which are these pre-built integrations that help you quickly connect from system to systems. And we're very excited to be here.
Thanks, Rico. And I'm one of the founders here at Strongpoint. Strongpoint was founded originally as FlowDocs with the vision of massively simplifying the change management process and removing the stress that people feel during change management by essentially automating all of the work that goes into it to make it run smoothly and efficiently. And I'll be going through some of these things during the course of this, but our whole objective is to try to give our customers an end-to-end solution to their documentation, change management, and compliance needs. So our topic today is multi-platform change management, and it's complex. It's a very complex problem that people have to solve. But we're going to start exploring it by talking about what it's like to do change management on a single system. So inside one system, whether it be NetSuite or Salesforce, making changes with confidence, as many of you are no doubt familiar, is a complex problem because every object, for example, a field or a record or a form or a script or a workflow or any of the different types of objects we have on this page can have many, many, many dependencies. And the dependencies can be both direct, such as from a custom field to a script, and indirect, but they're very, very difficult to observe and discover from within the system itself. And this complexity leads to risk, and the risk is that there would be broken processes, so in other words, things don't work the way they used to, corrupted data in the sense that, for example, some but not all of your data gets processed, or your data gets processed in a way that's not exactly correct, slow performance in the sense that things are executing that you never expected to execute because of a change. You've now brought new scripts into scope. We see this very commonly when people, you update one record after processing another, and all of a sudden all the scripts related to that record start to process. And also slow or uncompleted projects. Figuring out this mess of interdependencies is often actually the place where projects actually fail. And so this complexity exists, and Strongpoint spends a lot of time working with our clients to reduce this complexity. The best practices for dealing with this, whether or not you're working with Strongpoint, is that you need to make sure, number one, that you have documentation of all your projects as built. That's the number one mistake that companies make. Say, oh, you sure we have documentation? We have documentation that we did during the requirements process. Well, that documentation is very rarely detailed enough for this purpose, and even if it was, it isn't maintained, and even if it was maintained, it isn't maintained to the level of granularity. And the reason that doesn't happen is it's a massive amount of work. The level of granularity you need would be to include all the dependencies between the objects. And the reason why this is very difficult to do is it's a multidisciplinary activity. Developers will know some of it, business analysts or functional analysts will know other parts, the management team will know other things, organizational dependencies, the function of things. Gathering this information is very, very difficult. And the usage metadata, who's using things, when they're used, that is essentially impossible to accumulate manually. You need to, however, even if you don't have the usage data, if you're able to get the as-built documentation, you need to put a step in your change management process where you review that documentation and you go back and you think about dependencies. The number one mistake we see with people is that they use the tribal knowledge approach. Hey, do you think this is going to break anything? And the big problem we see in a lot of customers is that those people have turned over, so you really have to go back to documentation. There was a time in the NetSuite Salesforce world where the people had very stable jobs in that world, and the market wasn't growing as fast as it is now. Now both of those markets are growing at 30+% a year, and there's a lot of talent trade-off that causes the tribal knowledge approach not to be reliable. Testing is really, really important. Testing any of the changes that could affect scripts, workflows, and data sourcing in sandboxes before production release. Incredibly important. The question, though, is how do you identify which things? And again, documentation and a good process become the root of this. And then carefully invalidating the environments before testing and after migration. Make sure when you go to test something in your sandbox environments that you understand what the differences are between your sandbox and production environments. It will save you a massive amount of time. And in particular, whether or not using Strongpoint, in particular, check your user roles, your preferences, and any changes to scripting or workflows that have happened in the last little while. Those are the key things to look at. And then after migration, you need to double check that everything's exactly the same. We have tools for doing that automatically, but either way, you still have to do it. You have to do it. It's very, very important because if things are not exactly the same after migration, then the scripts that you just tested or the new process you just tested may not function properly. And don't just function on scripts and workflows, even though I keep using those as examples. Many other objects can have critical and unexpected impacts. An example from the NetSuite world, for example, is assigning a custom form and then having a script that executes in that role or an integration that executes in that role. The custom form can interfere with the flow of data, making a field unavailable. And you need to update this on a regular basis and keep very, very careful notes. So it has to become a process. Good processes lead to good results. Don't just depend upon people doing it the best that they can. And even though these things are easy to describe, the problem with this is it's massively time consuming to do these things. So build it into your projects that you're going to need to do this, because as you do more and more projects, the risk gets exponentially higher. Now, Rico, can you walk us through from the multi-system perspective? Because Celigo, of course, as one of the major iPaaS vendors in this space, it's a really great place to talk about the multi-system impacts.
Yeah, so these issues that you're describing inside of individual systems obviously can exist when you're connecting these different systems together. So, and not only that, they can quickly bring the complexity of the problem, to an exponential scale. So we've seen situations where, integration with Celigo is fairly easy to do between, particularly between Salesforce and NetSuite. It's the default choice for Smart Connector between the two different systems. And you can create the integration and you have, your records mapped, on one system mapped to another. But it is possible that, someone is inside of NetSuite and there's a record or a field that exists, a custom records, in which there isn't any obvious dependencies. There's no other fields perhaps inside of NetSuite that are dependent on it, so it might not be particularly obvious, or there's just limited dependencies. And what's not understood perhaps is that those fields or that field that you're looking at actually impact something on a totally different system by a totally different team. So you may, for example, try to add something to that custom record, or worst case, perhaps even delete it, and not be aware that you are creating, impacting the other system as well. So it could be, similarly in the individual system, you might be implementing, you might be affecting performance, you might be affecting the results themselves, and the reason this becomes an even more complicated problem is because we're quickly moving into what we call at Celigo the 100 app organization. So it's not uncommon for organizations to have hundreds of cloud applications, because these cloud applications are very easy to ramp up and get up and running, and they're very cost effective, and they don't take a lot of training. And IT and operational systems and businesses are typically encouraging their employees to use the tools that are best suited for their for their employees to solve the problems that they need to be solving. And so when that flexibility exists, now you have connections between multiple systems, and you want to understand what the dependencies are. And so you can see that that original challenge of documentation that Mark talked about in the individual system now quickly gets multiplied, not just between the applications, but between the connections between the different applications. And all of that requires a very similar approach in terms of documentation. So Mark, I'll throw it back to you to talk about the best practice in documenting across the integrations.
Thanks, Rico. One of the major the problems that companies run into is that the teams that work with the different applications are siloed, and they're siloed not only because the skill sets are different, but also for efficiency purposes. You don't want to have one central Uber change office. Maybe you do if you're a bank, but not so much if you're, even banks don't behave this way. And so you need to make sure that this documentation that you're creating and managing is available for teams working on different platforms. And you need to keep in mind, so there's a bit of noise in the background with something banging. So keep in mind that there are not just dependencies between the objects in the system, but dependencies between entire systems, and not just between the systems themselves, between the systems and the integration objects. Remember, Celigo is itself another platform that's sitting in the middle, and you need to think about that. The people who designed the integration didn't know that you were going to change the list values, and there's often a mapping that is occurring between the list values in one side and the list values in the other side, and if you change it only on one side, guess what? Your data is not going to go anywhere, and your integration may not function as intended. If you're lucky, you'll break it. If you're unlucky, you won't break it. It'll just not fully process all the data, and that's, of course, the sort of things that Celigo and Strongpoint are concerned about. Testing any changes that could affect integrations very, very carefully, because if you don't test them properly, you're going to end up with a world of confusion. And doing this testing is very difficult across platforms. Very difficult not everything has sandbox accounts. So very, very careful. You need to get as much information as you can ahead of time. And don't just focus on the integrations. Scripts and workflows and many other objects within the platform, as we talked about before, can have critical and unexpected impacts on another platform and the integration between them. It's very common for people to complain that their integration is not performing at the speed that they wanted, and it turns out that it's some script that's on a completely different record that's being triggered by some workflow on one of the records that you knew about. It's a daisy chain of slowness that's causing because of the way the platforms work. So at Strongpoint, what we do is we focus on automating all of this stuff to make it manageable, because human beings just weren't built to do this. Human beings are built to make really, really good decisions when they have the information at their fingertips, not to assemble large blocks of information and understand all the dependencies between them. And so we focus on doing the automation, and we're doing the smart change management processes that give people really good processes for doing it, and the environment management processes and the account cleanup activities that are so important. The automated documentation, this is sort of a virtuous stack. The automated documentation, if you don't have that, you don't really have anything. If you don't have, as you see, the key to risk management is having great documentation. But then if you have great processes on top of it, and our software can, of course, read our own documentation so it can make risk assessments for you and help you out. And then automated change monitoring on top of that. And then for those of companies who are public, we can now, we also audit the changes in real time, so we can give you the auditability and the auditability reporting, so you're always ready for audit the whole time. Rico, do you want to go say a little bit more about Celigo?
Yeah. So Celigo, particularly if you've been in the NetSuite ecosystem, there's a good chance that you've heard about Celigo. We've been around for over 10 years. We have over 1,200 satisfied customers. We process over 50 million records a day on the NetSuite side. And please note that we're not just for NetSuite. So we have over 300 NetSuite to Salesforce customers, along with many other platforms that you can connect to via our Integrator IO platform. And Celigo, by the way, was also named an iPaaS visionary in 2016 and 17 by the Gartner. We're in the Gartner Magic Quadrant. So our goal really is to create these simple, intuitive integrations between different systems and allow you to build your own as well. This is through a connection of a combination of our Integrator.io platform, where you can build your own integrations, or you can use our pre-built smart connectors, the most popular being the NetSuite to Salesforce connector, which allows you to map the fields between the two different systems. Our goal really is, yeah.
I was going to say, and the integration that we're announcing today between our two companies is actually being facilitated to a very large extent by the capabilities of the Celigo Integrator.io platform, because that's actually what was used by our development team to build an integration, not with something else, with actually Celigo. A remarkable example of eating your own dog food. So the team loved it. It was very easy to work with, and they're very, very pleased with the result.
Yeah, thank you. And it was and it shows immediate value in terms of the integration with Strongpoint for folks who particularly have really want to be thorough about their risk management and compliance and change management across different integrations. And with that, this is what we've announced. You want to take it away, Mark?
Sure. So with this new integration, Strongpoint can now, of course, Strongpoint can already document all the customizations and the standard and custom dependencies within a NetSuite and Salesforce instance. But now we can actually see right through the middleware layer, the Celigo middleware layer, to map all the dependencies between those systems and the rest of the cloud environment, and even dependencies between other systems and each other inside that cloud environment. So Strongpoint can now actually automatically document and manage change for NetSuite and Salesforce, the entire integration infrastructure sitting on Celigo's iPaaS, and all the objects connected to it. So it's a remarkable increase of scope for us. A lot of our customers are extremely excited about it because it's the next thing that they're really worried about, and we're very, very happy to announce it. So the big thing is automatically documenting NetSuite and Salesforce, automatically documenting any integrations to the Celigo platform, visualizing all the platforms and apps in your environment so that you can actually navigate through them, and I'll show you that in a second. Risk warnings and impact analysis that are cross-platform. Those of you who may have worked with Strongpoint before know we're very well known for not only our documentation, but the ability of our system to warn you about things. We can now warn you about things that are in a completely different system. And reconcile change reports across your entire ecosystem. The Uber report. Now, many of you may not need this for audit yet, because not every single system is in scope for Sarbanes-Oxley audit, for example, but it does help you sleep at night. So in this little example I've got here, this is an example of a lead record, a standard object in Salesforce, and there's a field on it, subscription procedure, and it has a dependency outside the system, NetSuite, and the dependency is shown as a dependency on the subscription ID field. Now, if we want to drill into that, we can actually drill into it and we can see the actual integration objects. Not only can we see them, we could actually drill into them, and we can actually see the change history of these integration objects. So we can actually now run change control around the entire life cycle. We're going to change this field, then we're going to make some changes to this, and we're going to change the integration object that connects them. And we can see right here, if you start from the integration object, you can see which field is dependent, in other words, receives data, and which is a source of data. Greatly simplifying the work for the BAs and the developers and anybody else who's trying to figure out what's going on in the system. And there's no work required to set this up at all. We can also provide cross-platform risk and impact analysis. Celigo and Strongpoint working together, we can actually look at, give you an answer and say, look, you're thinking about the subscription procedure, thinking about changing it. This cannot be safely deleted or modified because there's a dependent external data source, subscription ID, and there's an integration dependency, NetSuite to CA, new client flow, right? So exactly the information that everybody needs to do a super fast job with super high quality information at your fingertips. The integrations, as I mentioned, are also tracked, so it brings information like the description of the integration that was done during development, so people don't have to go into the Celigo platform to understand what this thing was for, and all of the other dependencies, including dependence on internal Celigo objects, so that if you're trying to remember, okay, which was the integration that did X or Y, you can go from the fields it touches, or you can go from who did it, or you can go from which components it uses or what types of components it uses. All that information is broken out for you, just like we do for scripts and workflows and searches and all the other objects that exist within a system. And the key aspects of the system are detailed individually to allow you to navigate through here. So you can move around very, very efficiently. It's all drillable. Essentially, as one of our customers once said, the best documented anything ever. I hope not, because I hope Boeing has better documentation than this. But for our purposes, we're trying to make very, very high levels of documentation, very, very high skill documentation with no work on the part of our customers. And you can also, of course, have integrations to Celigo integrations of any kind. So this is to Asana, the task management or project management application, and there's an integration from Salesforce through an integration to a data source in Asana. So it's not restricted to NetSuite and Salesforce. It works with any application on the Celigo platform. And again, it's completely drillable. So you've now got a visual way of understanding your environment, and you can drill in many, many, many different ways. Rico, you want to walk through how people can get this and the business relationship that they need to have with Celigo and Strongpoint?
Yep. So you need to be a Strongpoint and Celigo customer. So Celigo needs to be your iPass between different applications. If you have Celigo's Integrator IO platform available, and it has an extra flow still available, Strongpoint integration is free. It's a template that you can simply use a flow to enable. If you don't, if you're a Smart Connector customer or an Integrator IO customer that doesn't have the extra capacity, all it is you just need to purchase the additional capacity. So, and then you can add the Strongpoint template on top of that. Otherwise, if you're interested in integrations, or if you're interested in considering integrating two systems, particularly between NetSuite and Salesforce, contact us, and we can help with that.
And if you're if you're not yet a Celigo customer, obviously we think this is a very strong reason. This kind of vision and foresight, they came to the table with great enthusiasm. I think it's a great that kind of vision is a great reason to select your Celigo as your iPass vendor. If you're not, remember, Strongpoint still works in NetSuite and Salesforce. You can still do the mapping. The big difference is you have to do the mapping manually and be dependent upon a manual process, which is better than not having the mapping at all. And if you're not a Strongpoint customer, I still strongly encourage you to build out these mappings. In fact, if I was going to start anywhere, I'd start at the integrations out. not at the sort of what people sometimes do is the scripts first. The integrations are the most critical things to control, and they will connect to many of your other most critical things. If you want to reach out to us, you can reach Rico and myself at our emails or of course, at our websites. But I'm wondering now, do we have any questions? Does anybody have any questions for us today?
Hi, Mark. We did have one question that came in shortly ago. It was, is this solution available only for Salesforce and NetSuite? And
well, the base solution, Strongpoint, is only available for Salesforce and NetSuite right now. We're going to be expanding the platforms in the future. However, if you're running, it will be available shortly later in 2018 as a Force.com app, which will enable you to actually connect to many, many different applications. Which particular, I asked the question back, and maybe you could unmute the questioner. Which particular applications were you interested in? Were you able to unmute the questioner, Trevor?
No, the questioner, sorry, the questioner has dropped since I asked the
question. Okay, all right, that's okay. That's okay.
Another question that came in was, what was the time frame for availability for this?
So it'll be available in beta almost immediately. So we'll be making it available just shortly after Dreamforce. So if you want to get involved and look at and take a look at it, we can get it going almost immediately. And of course, because it's an integration between Strongpoint and Celigo, we can set it up so that you actually get this going against one of your sandbox accounts rather than production, so that you can evaluate it and feel comfortable. But we'll be working with, already got a bunch of people lined up. We'll be lining up a few different people to do it. For existing Strongpoint customers, this is simply an extension of their documentation and their workflow, between these two systems. And so we have a bunch of people quite excited to do it.
So that was all the questions that were asked in the chat. If anyone has any other questions, you could just raise your hand in the GoToMeeting control, or just quickly type in a message in the chat, and we can actually just take you off mute and let you ask your questions. But it looks like you guys covered everything, and all questions are answered so far.
Great, great. Rico, I want to thank you for joining us today and helping us announce this very exciting new partnership, but also talk about these very important issues around multi-platform risk and change management.
Thank you. Very happy to be part of this.
Thanks a lot, everybody.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks, everyone, for attending, and this will end the webinar.